They say life is shaped not by grand decisions, but by the smallest choices we barely notice, the ones that seem harmless at first, but slowly take root, leading us down paths we never intended to walk. I once heard a story, one that still lingers in my mind like a whisper from the past. It was told to me by an old monk, a man who had seen how a single step in the wrong direction, no matter how small, can change the course of an entire life. Stay with me till the end, because this story might just change the way you see your own life. The monastery was silent, its air heavy with anticipation. Inside a dimly lit chamber, an old monk lay on his deathbed, his breath shallow, his time near. Monks of all ages gathered around him, their eyes filled with reverence and sorrow. Among them stood a young monk, his chosen successor, watching his master with a mixture of grief and nervousness. The old monk, with a frail yet commanding voice, whispered, "Remember one thing, never allow a cat in your life." The young monk, however, could not hide his confusion. A cat? Why would his master, a man of wisdom and enlightenment, use his last breath to warn him about something so trivial? He wanted to ask, but the old monk had closed his eyes. His face was peaceful, his final lesson delivered. That night, the young monk sat outside his master's quarters, staring at the vast sky. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. An old monk approached him, one who had spent decades by their master's side. The old monk sat down beside him and spoke in a gentle voice. "I see you are troubled," he said. The young monk sighed. "Master's last words. I cannot understand them. Why would he warn me about a cat?" The old monk smiled faintly, as if recalling a distant memory. He gazed at the dark horizon before replying, "Because, my dear friend, a cat was where it all began. Let me tell you a story of how even the smallest indulgence can lead a man astray." The young monk leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "Listen carefully," the old monk continued, "for within this tale lies a truth that many realize only when it is too late. Many years ago, before he became a revered monk, he was a man of the world, a householder bound by duty and desire. His name was Anand, and he lived in a prosperous village, married to a beautiful woman with 2 children who adored him. To the world, Anand had everything: a loving family, wealth, and a respected position in society. But within him, a storm raged. He often found himself staring into the distance, questioning the meaning of it all. What is life beyond these attachments? Beyond wealth, beyond love, beyond family? One night, a great festival took place in the village. Laughter and music filled the air, but Anand felt disconnected. He wandered through the festivities, watching people dance, eat, and celebrate. They seemed happy, content with the small joys of life. But something inside him whispered, "Is this all there is?" That night, as his wife and children slept, he sat near the window, gazing at the moon. In the silence, a thought formed. "If I stay, I will grow old, die, and become just another name in the village history. My children will forget me in time. My wife will move on. The world will continue without me. So what is my purpose?" The weight of this realization was unbearable. At that moment, he knew he had to leave. Before dawn, he rose from his bed, his movements careful. He walked to his children, placing a trembling hand on their heads. He turned to his wife, sleeping peacefully, unaware that her world was about to shatter. A deep pain clenched his chest. Was he selfish? Was he cruel? Or was he simply following a higher calling? He left without looking back. The world outside his village was vast and unfamiliar. He walked for days, his feet aching, his stomach empty, yet his heart felt lighter. He had abandoned his past, but he had also abandoned his burdens. Finally, he reached the outskirts of a dense forest. A small village lay nearby, its people simple and welcoming. Seeing a wandering ascetic, They treated him with reverence, offering him food and shelter. But Anand, now a monk, declined comfort. He chose to live at the edge of the forest, in a small abandoned hut made of bamboo. His only possessions were 2 robes and a begging bowl. His days were spent in meditation, his nights under the vast sky. He had renounced everything: family, wealth, comfort, for the pursuit of truth. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It started with something small, something insignificant. The monk lived in solitude, free from distractions. Each morning he walked barefoot to the village, accepting alms with silent gratitude. The villagers revered him, calling him the Enlightened One, a title he neither accepted nor denied. His days were spent in deep contemplation, his nights under the open sky. For the first time in his life, he felt free. But then, a small problem arose: rats. At first, they were just a minor nuisance, scurrying in the shadows, nibbling at the edges of his robes. But soon they became bold, chewing great holes in the fabric. The monk tried to ignore them. Attachment to material things is an illusion, he told himself. What does it matter if my robes are torn? But the problem grew. They chewed not just his robes, but also the mat on which he meditated. Sometimes they even ran over his body as he slept. His peace was disturbed. One morning, as he stood in the village with his begging bowl, an elderly farmer noticed the monk's troubled expression. "Master," the farmer said, bowing respectfully, "is something troubling you?" The monk hesitated. Was this truly a problem? Or was it simply his mind creating an unnecessary attachment? After a pause, he spoke. "The rats in my hut, they are becoming troublesome." The farmer nodded knowingly. "Ah, that is no way for a holy man to live. I have a simple solution. Keep a cat." The monk frowned. "A cat?" "Yes," the farmer said. "A cat will keep the rats away, and you can meditate in peace. I will bring you one." The monk hesitated. He had renounced all possessions, but was a cat truly a possession? It was a living being, not an object. Perhaps it was different. By evening, the farmer returned with a small, sleek black cat. "This will solve your problem, master." And it did. The rats vanished within days. The monk, satisfied, resumed his meditations. But soon, another problem arose. The cat needed milk. At first, the monk thought little of it. The cat was small, and a little milk from the village would suffice. Each morning, as he went to beg for alms, he also requested a small bowl of milk. The villagers, eager to serve a holy man, gladly provided it. But as the days passed, the monk noticed something. He had to visit more houses than before. Begging for food was simple. 1 or 2 households were enough. But milk? Not every home had it to spare. Some days, he returned to his hut with only enough food for himself, leaving the cat to meow in hunger. At night, the sound of the cat's pitiful cries echoed through the hut. One morning, as he stood at the village square, an elderly woman, watching him struggle to collect milk, approached him. "Master," she said kindly, "I have been thinking, instead of asking for milk every day, why not keep a cow? That way, you will have enough for yourself and the cat." The monk blinked. "A cow? I am a renunciate," he said slowly. "I have given up all possessions." The woman smiled. "A cow is not a possession, master. It is a provider. It will serve you, just as you serve the world." Her words made sense. Was it really wrong to accept a cow? That evening, the villagers brought him a young, healthy cow. "Now you will never have to worry about milk," they said. And so, the monk kept the cow. At first, it was simple. He would milk it each morning, giving the cat its share, drinking only what was necessary for himself. But then, a new problem arose. The cow needed grass. The cow was gentle, its large eyes filled with innocence. It never demanded anything, never caused trouble, except for one thing: she needed to eat. At first, the monk thought it would be simple. Each morning when he went to the village to beg for food, he also asked for some grass. The villagers, seeing their revered monk now tending to a cow, provided it without hesitation. But soon problems arose. Some days the villagers had no extra grass. Other days the monk had to visit multiple homes, delaying his return to the hut. One afternoon, as he stood in the village square, holding a bundle of dry grass in one hand and his begging bowl in the other, a man approached him. "Master," he said hesitantly, "forgive me, but is it right for a great monk like you to go around begging for grass?" The monk was taken aback. "Why not?" "Because it does not seem fitting. Food for your sustenance is one thing, but to beg for an animal? That is not the way of an ascetic." The monk lowered his gaze. Was the man right? Had he allowed himself to become entangled in something unnecessary? Seeing his hesitation, another villager stepped forward. "Master, we have a simple solution," he said. "There is a patch of land near your hut. Let us clear it for you. You can grow your own grass, and you won't have to ask for it every day." The monk frowned. "I am a renunciate. I do not till the land." "Then do not," the villager replied. "We will prepare it for you. The land will serve you, just as the cow serves you." The argument made sense. Was growing grass truly a violation of his renunciation? He would not be working the land himself, merely allowing it to grow what was needed. And so the villagers cleared a small plot near his hut, planting fresh grass. Within weeks, the cow had plenty to eat. The problem was solved. But then, the monk noticed something. The land was fertile. Grass grew effortlessly. And if the land could provide for the cow, could it not provide for him as well? A new thought entered his mind, one that had not existed before. Why beg for food when he could grow it himself? At first, the monk resisted the idea. He reminded himself, "I am a renunciate. I must not be attached to worldly things." But every morning when he walked past the small patch of grass, he saw something else. Empty space. If the land can give grass, why not rice or lentils? Would it not be better to be self-sufficient than to beg daily? One day, as he sat outside his hut, a kind old farmer approached him. "Master, the soil here is rich," the farmer said, pointing at the ground. "A small effort, and you can grow food for yourself. Then you won't have to walk to the village every day." The monk hesitated. "I have renounced the world. I cannot till the land." The farmer smiled. "Then do not. I will do it for you." The next morning, the farmer arrived with a few other villagers. With eager hands, they tilled a small patch beside the hut and planted rice and vegetables. The monk watched in silence. This was not his doing. He had not touched the soil, had not broken his vows. Yet, when the first sprouts emerged, something stirred within him: pride. He told himself it was not attachment, it was simply practicality. When the crops ripened, the villagers harvested them and presented them to him with devotion. For the first time in years, the monk ate without begging. The food was his, grown near his own hut. And so a new thought took root in his mind. If I can grow my own food, do I need to rely on the village at all? But life had more in store for him, because as he worked in the field one day, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Master, do you need help?" He turned and saw her, the woman who would change everything. She stood at the edge of the field, a simple cloth draped over her head, shielding her from the sun. Her eyes were filled with quiet curiosity, her hands clasped together in a gesture of respect. The monk studied her. She was young, not a child, but not old either. "Who are you?" he asked. She lowered her gaze. "My name is Devi, Master. I am a widow from the village." A pause. The monk remained silent, waiting for her to continue. She took a hesitant step forward. "The villagers say you are growing crops. If you allow me, I can help you. I have worked in the fields all my life." The monk frowned. "But why?" She hesitated, then spoke in a soft voice. "Because I have no one. My husband is gone. My in-laws do not want me. I have nowhere else to go." The monk's mind warned him. This is not your concern. Let go of attachments. But another thought surfaced. She needs help. And I do need help with the fields. He looked at the growing crops. If she worked the land, he would be free to meditate again. Finally, he nodded. You may stay. And so, Devi stayed. At first, she was just a presence, a quiet figure tending the fields while the monk resumed his meditation. She did not disturb him. She spoke only when necessary. But the days passed, and slowly, things began to change. The monk, who had once lived on a single meal of alms, now ate warm food cooked by her hands. The hut, which had once been a simple shelter, became cleaner, neater, more like a home. The cow, which had once been just a provider of milk, now had someone to care for it, comb its fur and talk to it in soft whispers. And Devi, who had once been just a helper, became something more. One evening, as the monk sat outside staring at the sunset, Devi approached him. Master, she said hesitantly, the fields have given a good harvest. Would you like me to prepare something special tonight? The monk turned to her. In the golden light, she looked peaceful, almost radiant. For the first time, he noticed the warmth in her voice. For the first time, he noticed her. Something shifted inside him, a part of him. The monk warned him, this is a path you must not walk. But another part, the man, felt something else, comfort, companionship, a feeling he had not known in years. He nodded, yes, that would be nice. And so, the woman who had come as a helper stayed as something more. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The monk still meditated, still lived in the hut, still wore the robes of a renunciate, but his life no longer felt like renunciation. Each morning, when he opened his eyes, the smell of fresh food greeted him. Each afternoon, as he walked through the fields, Devi worked beside him, her hands deep in the soil, her laughter blending with the rustling leaves. Each evening, when he sat in silence, she was there, not speaking, not disturbing, just there. And slowly, the silence between them became something else. Understanding, companionship. One night, as they sat by the dim glow of an oil lamp, Devi spoke. Master, may I ask you something? The monk looked up from his food. You may. She hesitated, then asked, do you still see yourself as a renunciate? The monk frowned. Of course. Why do you ask? Devi lowered her gaze, tracing patterns on the floor with her fingers. Because I have seen how you live now. You do not beg. You do not wander. You till the land. You eat what you grow. You have shelter. And she hesitated before finishing. You are not alone anymore. The monk felt something tighten in his chest. This is not attachment, he insisted. This is only survival. Devi looked at him for a long moment, then smiled gently. If you say so, master. But that night, as the monk lay in bed, her words echoed in his mind. Do you still see yourself as a renunciate? For the first time, he was unsure. For the first time, doubt crept in. For the first time, he was afraid of the answer. As the seasons passed, the small hut in the forest transformed into something more than just a monk's shelter. It became a home. The monk still meditated, still wore his robes, still sat in deep thought under the banyan tree. But something had changed. One evening, as they sat outside after a long day of work, a cool breeze swept through the fields. The sky was painted in shades of crimson and gold, the air filled with the scent of fresh earth. Devi was sitting beside him, grinding herbs in a small stone bowl. The rhythmic sound filled the quiet air. After a while, she spoke. Master, are you happy here? The monk turned to her, surprised. Why do you ask? She kept her eyes on the herbs. Because you never speak of leaving. The monks in the village, they come and go. But you stay. The monk exhaled slowly. This place gives me peace. Devi looked up. "And do I?" The question lingered between them. The monk did not answer right away. He looked at her, the soft glow of firelight flickering across her face, the gentle curve of her lips, the quiet expectation in her eyes. He knew the truth. Yes, she gave him peace. More than peace. She gave him a reason to stay, but he could not say it. Instead, he simply nodded. "You have been kind to me." A small smile played on her lips, but there was something else in her gaze, something unspoken. She reached forward, taking his hand in hers. The touch was light, hesitant, but it was enough. Enough to cross a line, enough to shatter the fragile wall he had built between them. For a long moment, they sat there, hands intertwined, hearts pounding in silence. The monk did not pull away, and in that moment, his fate was sealed. After that night, something changed. The monk and Devi fell into a rhythm, a life that was neither entirely worldly nor entirely renunciate. They woke with the sun, worked in the fields together, shared meals, and spoke of things beyond the scriptures, of the changing seasons, of the birds nesting in the trees, of memories long buried. And slowly, the monk stopped meditating as much. His prayers grew shorter. His robes, once symbols of his detachment, became just clothes. He still told himself, "I am only living simply." But deep down, he knew this was no longer the life of a monk. One day, as he sat outside mending a broken basket, Devi approached him. She hesitated, then placed something on the ground beside him, a small bundle of cloth. The monk looked up at her, confused. "What is this?" She bit her lip, eyes glistening. "A gift, and a truth I can no longer keep from you." His hands trembled as he unfolded the cloth. Inside was a tiny pair of handmade sandals, far too small for an adult. At first, he did not understand. Then, realization dawned. His breath caught. He looked up at her in disbelief. "Devi, are you saying—" She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "A child, master. Our child." The monk's heart pounded in his chest. He stared at the sandals, then at her, then back at the sandals. A storm raged within him. How did this happen? He wanted to ask, but he knew. He had crossed the line long ago. His life as a renunciate was over, and now he was no longer just a man. He was a father. For the first time in years, the monk did not know whether to rejoice or despair. The monk could not sleep that night. As the weeks passed, the monk became more accepting of his new life, but the internal struggle did not vanish. He still meditated, though less often. The child grew within Devi, and the monk found himself doing things he had never imagined. Building a small crib, helping in the fields, caring for the cow, and yes, even listening to Devi's stories of the world beyond the forest. One day, as they sat under the shade of the banyan tree, Devi asked him, "Master, do you ever think of the village monks?" He looked up at her. "Sometimes." Devi smiled gently. "Do you think they would call you a fallen monk?" The question stung, but the monk did not shy away from it. "Perhaps they would," he said, "but I am no longer sure what it means to be fallen." He paused. "I spent so many years trying to rise above life, trying to transcend it. But maybe it was never about escaping life, but learning to live it fully." Devi's eyes softened. "And now you are living it, master." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." And in that moment, something shifted within him. He realized that while his journey had not gone as planned, it had not been wasted either. The birth of the child came quietly, just as dawn broke one peaceful morning. The monk was by Devi's side, holding her hand, offering what little comfort he could as she brought new life into the world. In the quiet, humble surroundings of their small hut, he watched in awe as Devi gave birth to their child, a son. As Devi held the newborn in her arms, she smiled at the monk. Her gaze held a mixture of joy and tenderness. "Master, he is ours now." The monk looked down at the small, fragile being in her arms. And for the first time in a long while, the monk felt something he had never allowed himself to feel. "Yes, he is ours," the monk whispered. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The monk had begun to realize something fundamental. He was no longer the same person he had been. One evening, the monk sat on the ground outside his hut, watching his son play in the dirt. Devi was beside him, humming softly as she worked. There was a peacefulness here, one that he had never known in his life as a wandering monk. For the first time in many years, he felt truly at home. For the first time, he felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next day, a group of monks from the nearby village came to visit. They had heard rumors of the once renowned monk who had given up his wandering ways and settled down in the forest. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern. When they arrived, they found the monk sitting outside with Devi, a child in his arms, and the unmistakable air of contentment surrounding him. At first, the visiting monks were silent, unsure of how to approach him. They had expected to find a man lost in delusion, a monk who had fallen from grace. But the monk who sat before them was not the same man they had known. One of the monks, the eldest among them, stepped forward. His eyes were filled with sorrow, pity even. "Brother," he said softly, "what have you done? You have left the true path, the path of detachment. You were meant to lead, to inspire. Now you are a mere man with a wife and a child. What are you?" The monk looked up at him, his face calm. "I am what I have always been, a man. And now I am a father, a husband, and a simple man who is learning to live fully." The eldest monk shook his head. "This is not the way." The monk stood slowly, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps not, but it is my way." There was a long silence. The monks exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. After a long pause, one of the younger monks spoke. "Is there peace in your life now?" The monk smiled, a soft, knowing smile, more than I ever imagined possible. The monk stayed for a while, observing the quiet life the monk had built for himself. In the end, they left quietly, their minds filled with questions they had never considered before. Years later, as the monk grew older, his hair grayed and his steps slowed, he often found himself sitting outside, in the place where it all began. One day, as he sat alone, the same elder monk who had once visited him all those years ago came to see him. The monk had grown frail, his steps uncertain, but his presence still carried the weight of wisdom. "Brother," the elder monk said softly, "I have come to see you once more. Tell me, are you at peace with your life?" The monk looked at him, his gaze clear and serene. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm. "I have found peace, not in renouncing the world, but in living fully within it. I have found my truth in the embrace of life, in the love of family, in the small, ordinary moments that make life meaningful." The elder monk nodded slowly, as though the words had been the very answer he had been seeking. "I see. You have discovered something precious." The two monks sat in silence, the weight of years and experience between them. As the sun set on the monk's final days, his life had come full circle. He had entered the world seeking to transcend it, but he had left it with a heart full of love, understanding, and peace. The child who had once been so small now stood beside him, a young man with wisdom in his eyes. Devi, still by his side, held his hand with the quiet affection of a lifetime shared. The monk, now old and frail, looked up at the sky, the same stars that had once guided his journey. "Life is not about escaping," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's about living, truly living." without fear, without regret. In this, we find freedom. And with that, he closed his eyes, his heart at peace. The story of the monk teaches us a profound lesson about life. Small, seemingly insignificant choices can shape our entire destiny. The monk's journey began with a simple act, keeping a cat to protect his robes. And slowly, without realizing it, he was drawn back into the very life he had once renounced. This mirrors the way our minds work. We allow small indulgences, minor distractions, and seemingly harmless habits into our lives, thinking they will remain under our control. But slowly, they grow, consume us, and before we know it, we have strayed far from our true purpose. If this story made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to Soul Scripted for more deep and thought-provoking stories. Let's explore the wisdom of life together. See you in the next story.